Cepher Commentaries. Today we continue with our commentaries today on Genesis chapter 7. And Yahweh said to Noah, "Come you and all your house into the ark, for you have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast you shall take to you by sevens, the male and his female, and of the beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. In 7 days I will cause it to rain upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights, and every living substance that I have made I will destroy from the face of the earth." And Noah did according to all that Yahweh commanded him, and Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. Okay, so here we're going to see a number of things, but again, talking about the generations that are being specified by Yah. Because Yah says to Noah, "I have seen righteous before me in this generation." And again, we're talking Noah was the 10th generation from Adam. And by the time we get to 10 generations, it is only Noah and his family. But what's also interesting here is the question, why would Yah have him take 7 pairs of clean animals, but only 2 pairs of unclean animals, and 7 pairs of the fowl? I mean, this is an interesting question. And does this, in fact, grant a permission, if you will, for Noah to, eat of the clean animals? This is a question, because when we go back, we look, there is a gospel the humane gospel according to the Essenes, which claims that at all material times, man was created as a vegetarian or even a vegan in the garden. And yet we see, and we did see, that Yah clothed the man and the woman with skin. Now, some people say, well, they were light beings and they were clothed with flesh, with human flesh. But I don't think that's what the story actually tells. I think the story says they were covered with skins, animal skins. And this would be interesting because it does depict the slaughter of animals, even in the garden, or at least at the close of the garden. So the question is here, does Yah provide for carnivorous eating among mankind at this point? Now, there are those who reason and say, well, the fact is that men have, eye teeth. They have canines, which are there because man is a meat eater. Well, that's very possible that that's the situation. One of the big issues arises is going to be cannibalism, of course. Cannibalism is going to be prohibited in the scripture, but why would it be the subject of a prohibition if it didn't exist as a transgression before? So again, we see this idea that there is going to be the potential that Noah is going to be eating clean animals. And of course, one of the questions is there something in the good book about the chicken? Well, arguably, you can see that the fowls are going to be kept in sevens. Well, let's continue on here. And Noah went in, and his sons and his women, and his sons' women with him into the ark because of the waters of the flood, of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls and of everything that creeps upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 to El Noach into the ark, the male and the female, as Elohim had commanded Noah. And it happened that after 7 days, the waters of the flood were upon the earth. Okay, so now we can see that this discussion, some people might say, well, it's pretty clear here that, in fact, they only came in 2 by 2. Well, no, you have a preceding statement saying you're going to take 7 couples of clean animals, and of everything else is coming in 2 by 2. And this gives you some idea that when we're talking about the book Bere'shiyth, you're talking about really a summary discussion here, particularly of the antediluvian world. all of the prehistory, 10 generations of the Beni Adam, all of this history for 10 generations is going to be summarized in a quick 7 chapters. One can imagine that those 7 chapters are going to be cursory, and they're going to be succinct. They're even going to be abbreviated. And so really what is discussed, the idea that these are whitecaps, if you will, of the waves that are being discussed. We are seeing just the very peak and tops of the discussion. And the discussion is going to be hinging around here a couple of things we're going to begin to see now in this discussion of Noah, that the dates and the timing are going to become very important because the calendar is going to begin to arise. And when we read the book of Jubilees, we see that the calendar becomes much more pronounced, that the days upon which the flood happened, when the flood receded, when Noah initially got off the boat and what he did and the festivities that he held in order to recognize the fact that they had been saved from the flood, all of these things are going to be dating. So we begin to leave the idea of the Toldot, the generations, in tracing with particularity the genetic seed, and instead begin to deal with what's happening with the calendar. The calendar becomes ever more evident. Now remember, bear in mind that in Genesis 1, we had a discussion, Genesis 1:14, Genesis 1:12, and Genesis 1:16, telling us that the greater light, the lesser light, and the stars also are to be used for signs, seasons, days, and years. And this is a very important instruction, and it's an instruction that bears witness to us even to this day that it is not scriptural at all to be engaged in a calendar that is algorithmic. Now, what I mean by an algorithmic calendar, we have a classic example in the Gregorian calendar, which sets an arbitrary time for the beginning of the day in the middle of the night. It also sets an arbitrary time for the beginning of the year, starting at the beginning of the 11th month. And so it's an artificially constructed algorithm, which really makes no sense, right? Is it easy to remember? 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except for that one that doesn't have 31, which has 28, although it doesn't always have 28. Sometimes it has 29. And then even then, it may not be completely accurate. Is that how the poem goes? How simple is that? Well, it's not. And it is an algorithm that was constructed by the papacy, and the algorithm has since been adopted by the entire world. And it is anti-scriptural. It is ascriptural. We are to use the sun, the moon, and the stars also for establishing signs, seasons, days, and years. And so we're going to begin to see that as this story begins to unfold now, that the dates are going to become important, the dates and the calculations and how we go about establishing the year and how mankind is going to be using the sun, the moon, and the stars in order to determine the seasons of planting, the seasons of the feasts, the days of the week, the days of the month, the months of the year. All of these things are going to be calculated now and are going to become an important part of Scripture. So as we continue now, verse 11, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. Okay. The same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up and the windows of heaven were opened. Now, you could say, all right, well, this was the 2nd month after Noah's birthday, right? Because it says in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month. And I don't think that's the case. I think this is dealing with the 2nd month of the year. And the 2nd month of the year is known in the ancient Hebrew as the month of Ziv, the 2nd month. In the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month. Now, this does not calculate as any feast day that is common with Leviticus 23. It's just the 17th day of the 2nd month. And on that same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, now this is an intense event. And when we talk about this event, This event signals something that had not been seen before and is really going to change the whole face of the earth, because the earth was described as completely different prior to this flood. The ground was cursed. There was kind of a mist or a dew that was over the whole of the earth. And I think the atmosphere was probably different. Certainly the genetic construct among the animals was different. And we can see, because many of the animals and the human beings were living almost 1,000 years. After this flood, that's not going to happen. The lifespan of mankind is going to be dramatically shortened. And this lifespan, I do not believe, was the lifespan initially intended for Adam, because both Adam and Hua lived over 900 years. So this shortening of the lifespan is going to take place because of the structural differences in the whole of the earth following this deluge. And so this becomes an extremely important part of this. So when we talk about the windows of heaven were opened and the fountains of the great deep were broken up, we know now that there's been a lot of evidence that has established the fact that there is a great ocean underneath the crust of the ocean, underneath the crust of the earth. So we currently see the water on the face of the earth. We did not necessarily understand that under the crust of the earth, there's also a great ocean. But they have, in fact, established that there is great waters under the earth. Now, how much? That remains a question. But one could readily imagine that when you talk about the earth and its magnetosphere, which is readily measurable, and this magnetosphere is dependent upon a northern pole and a southern pole, a positive portion of the anode and a negative portion of the anode, which are controlling the magnetosphere. The magnetosphere is being generated from something that would be like a magneto, that is to say, water circulating around maybe an iron core. And at the heart of that iron core, something intense in its power, that from the circular motion of the earth around this iron core, so magnetic energy is generated, and this magnetosphere then is surrounding the earth. As a result of that construct, of that idea, the way the earth was initially formed. So we can see that the waters above would be the waters above the earth. The waters below the earth are the waters below the earth's surface. And this says here that these fountains of the great deep were broken up. So the crust of the earth began to come apart, if you will, and it came apart to allow the water underneath the crust to begin to seep out and to join the water that is going to be pouring down from the heavens. Now, we talk about the water pouring down from the heavens. This has also been discussed to some degree, that one of the possible ideas, I'm not going to call it a hypothesis, but let's call it an idea, is that there may at one time have been an ice ring around the earth, like similar to the ice ring around Saturn or Uranus. And this ice ring consisted almost all of frozen water vapor. And how vast was the ring, no one knows, if there was only one or if there were more. But at any rate, we know that the scripture does discuss the destruction of the planet, the wandering star, Rahab. Rahab, named after the prostitute that you were taught in Sunday school. His name was Rahab, but it's not, it's Rahab. And the planet is discussed in several passages in scripture, including in the Psalms, as being destroyed. Now, this planet, interestingly enough, occupies a space between Mars and Jupiter. And when you calculate this asteroid belt that is now in orbit in that space between Mars and Jupiter, we can see that there is an algorithm that expresses the mean ecliptic of all 10 planets. And that algorithm is actually predicted in Stonehenge, the monument that exists in England. It predicts the algorithm that expresses the mean ecliptic of all 10, not 9, 10 planets. Also equally interesting is the megalith found in Ireland at Newgrange called Nouth, has a petroglyph, a negative petroglyph scratched on one of the stones that shows 10 planets around the sun and 10 planets. And also equally interesting is that they're in proportion to one another. In other words, we see the idea that Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune are larger than the Earth and Mars, which are much larger than Venus and Mercury and Pluto, of course. And Rahav is also in this mix. So because of this, we can see that if Rahav somehow was destroyed by something coming through the solar system and it became an asteroid belt, and these asteroids were projected into the Earth's orbit such that it arrived not once, but twice. In other words, as we came through in our annual orbit, we came through at one point, and then it was going to be another point where we were going to come through it again. And some people argue it was 1,200 years later. And if so, the watchers were here and instructed to come to the Earth to warn mankind that this destruction was coming. And instead of warning mankind that the destruction was coming, they decided instead to engage in relationships with human women and to lord over them and to rule over them, instead of instructing them and warning them of the impending doom. Nonetheless, other messengers would come to Noah and they would tell him, this is coming and you're going to need to prepare. And he does prepare for 100 years. He prepares in building an ark and also in discussing these things with mankind. Mankind, who was, of course, tone deaf and is not going to react until there's some kind of absolute cataclysm. And at that point, and we're going to see here, that it was too late for them, because it reads, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the second month, the 17th day of the month, the same day, were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And rain was upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. In that self same day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japhet, the sons of Noah, and Noach's woman, and the 3 women of his sons with them, into the ark. They and every beast after its kind, and all the cattle after their kind. And, let's see, just a minute. And every fowl after his kind, and every bird of every sort. And they went in to Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. That is to say, all things that breathed, 2 by 2 entered the ark, and they that went in male and female of all flesh, as Elohim had commanded him, and Yahweh shut him in. In other words, Noah did not close the door, Yahweh shut him in. And there's been images that have shown this, how the door of the ark was kind of self-closing. That is to say, when the water rose, it closed the door. And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bore up the ark, and it was lifted above the earth. And the water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the waters. Now imagine that. Imagine there's 8 of you, and you're the survivors of a deluge that encompasses the whole of the earth. Do you know you're going to survive this? What do you think? What do you know? How do you deal with the situation? Are we going to be on the surface of water forever and ever? Is this going to be our life, right? And of course, there's no sail described on this boat. This boat is just simply bobbing on the water. And the waters prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole of heaven were covered. 15 cubits upward did the water prevail. Okay, so we're talking about it's at least 30 feet above the highest mountain. Now, of course, at this time, again, we like to believe that the whole of the fixture of the earth was such that we understand it now, and that's the way it was back then. Well, probably not. Probably not. In fact, there's reason to believe that the mountain ranges, for instance, such as the Himalayas, this is a result of continental shift and the idea of these tectonic plates crushing into one another and forcing a bit of ground up. I mean, for instance, we know now that there have been megaliths that around the world that are now completely underwater. I mean, there's a city off the Egyptian coast, off Alexandria, that is an underwater city. I mean, the whole city is under the water. There's a city off the coast of India that's completely under the water. There's megaliths that have been found under the water off the coast of the Bahamas, off the coast of Japan. And of course, there's been many, many artifacts found on the floor of the North Sea, which most historians believe was dry at one point, a place called Doggerland. So we know that there's been a tremendous change to the geography of the earth. And not just because of the flood, but there have been, and in fact, we see here, in fact, I think there's something written, I don't know if it's in Enoch or in Jubilees, or possibly in Jasher, but that Noach perceived the earth as expanding. Noach perceived the earth as expanding. Now, this explains a couple of things. One is we see that we're going to see here a 360-day year is going to be exposed in this chapter. Whereas we see the book of Hanok, the book of Jubilees telling us that the year is 364 days. But of course, both those books were written and preceded Joshua's long day that's set out in the book of Joshua, where the sun stood still for 12 hours. Did this create a 365th day? Also, you can also see that in Isaiah, we had the sundial move backwards. Did this create the additional time span that moved us from a 364-day year to a 365-day year? In addition to that, if the earth was expanding, one might imagine that it would take 365 revolutions before you've completed your circuit around the sun. But if the earth is expanding, is it possible that that expansion would create a larger orbit and require us 365 days? Or did the expansion slow, actually, talking about 365th or 164th of a day added to each day in the rotation of the earth that would give us a 365-day year? So you see, that's not a lot. That's not a lot. But it is very possible that the earth, one, may have expanded. Two, its weight may have shifted dramatically. Its weight may have shifted as a result of there being water, which formerly was in orbit around the earth, now being on the earth. And when you think about this too, there's other possibilities that existed during this period of time. For instance, it's possible that the earth was not on a tilt at that time, that the earth was straight up. And so because the earth was straight up, you would not see the four seasons of the year, because the four seasons wouldn't exist, because at all there might be subtle differences depending on the ecliptic. It might be a little cooler at certain times of the year, a little warmer at other times of the year, depending on the ecliptic. But you're not going to see the idea of solstice and equinox, and this isn't going to happen until after there is a tilt on the earth. Now, in addition to that, again, when we talk about the idea that this possibility that Rahab was destroyed and the asteroid belt visited the earth initially, causing the Younger Dryas, and we were going to go through that asteroid belt a second time, which was going to cause a disaster about which the Watchers knew. They were told to forewarn Noah. They did not. And instead, so it basically came upon the earth as a surprise, and that same asteroid belt may have collapsed this whole idea of a ice ring around the earth. May have collapsed that ice ring, and that ice ring, when it's initially coming through the atmosphere, is going to melt until the atmosphere is sufficiently cooled that it no longer melts, which may have caused the formation of substantial bodies of ice at the poles where this would gather. So there would be a substantial body of ice gathering at the North Pole and at the South Pole. And it's very interesting because some of the megalithic record does show ancient maps depicting the continental shelf of Antarctica with specificity and accuracy to the modern scopes, which they could have only known had it been ice-free at some point. So the ice tends to come and go on the Earth. That's one thing we can keep in mind. And we know, for instance, that the ice pack at one point was so great that it covered virtually all of Canada and all the way down into North America. They know this up in Montana, for instance, and even into the state of Washington. They can see evidence of this ice pack that used to be there. Well, that ice pack is going to create a different climate on the Earth, and all of these things are going to be something that is happening in a relatively short period of time, not billions and billions of years or millions and billions of years, but rather thousands of years and even hundreds of years. And so becomes an important point, right? Important point. And so, and all flesh died that moved upon the earth, both of fowl and cattle and of beasts and of every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, and all that was on the dry land died. The breath of life, right? The neshama chayim, all of that was gone, and every living substance was destroyed, which was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things and the fowl of the heavens, and they were destroyed from the earth, and Noah only remained alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the waters prevailed upon the earth for 150 days exactly. Okay, so we know it started out on the 17th day of the second month, and it's going to be for exactly 150 days, and we're going to see that that is going to be calculated as 5 months later. Okay, now, before we leave this passage and talking about this, we see here that in Genesis, as I mentioned to you before, this is very much a summary or white-cap discussion of the history. So many of the details have been completely omitted that we don't know. And so the question is, are there other books out there that have a historicity associated with them that can be discussing some of these facts? And the answer is yes, there are, particularly the book Yovelim and the book Hanok and even the book of Yashar, all have discussion points to talk about what happened here. So, for instance, let's ask the question: who were the women that were on the boat with Noah, and why aren't their names given? Now, some people will say, "Well, this is a patriarchal discussion, therefore the names of women are not going to be given." But yet, many women's names are given in the text. From Rahab to Ruth, the Moabitess, to Bathsheba, to Tamar. I mean, to Deborah. There's many, many women's names that are given. Hua, for instance. But the name of Noach's wife. Now, in the book of Jasher, we see the name Emzara given. And I believe that this is a pronunciation transliteration, Imzara. But I do not believe it's Zara, but rather Zerach. And Zerach is very interesting because this is the name given to the son of Judah, the firstborn of Judah, Zerach. And this means Zerah is seed, and the cha at the end is the suffix meaning your. So Zerach, and people know that speak Hebrew that quite often when you have the kaf, the final kaf at the end of the word, it's pronounced Zerach. So you get a little bit of, but it's very little, and quite often the words are just spelled with an H on the end, pronounced Zerach, because people don't say the Zerach. So when we see the name Emzarach in Jubilees, this name, in my opinion, is Hebrew for the mother of your seed, Im Zerach. Im, mother, Zerach, your seed, the mother of your seed. So as we saw with the name Cain, which means invoked to jealousy, or Chabel, which means the lamentation, so we see the name of the wife of Noach being described as the mother of your seed, Im Zerach. But was that her name? Now, there's big questions that are going around right now, and I think they're good questions, as to whether or not there was any kind of Nephilim seed that was retained on the ark. And the answer is that the chances are very great that there was, in fact, a DNA mutation that was maintained on the ark. Was it maintained by the wives, one of the wives? And if so, which wife was it that maintained the Nephilim seed that would then bring the Nephilim back onto the earth, as is mentioned in Numbers 13:33, the sons of Anak? Well, it's very possible that this was the case, that in fact, there was residual DNA from the Beni Elohim who had transgressed and had relations with human women, as described in Genesis 6:4, and that seed was retained and would come after the flood, as it is written in 6:4,